The Crystal Ballroom was the pride of the galaxy. Built by master architects from many worlds, it stood like a palace of light. Every wall was made of shining crystal, glowing softly from the energy flowing through its veins. The floor looked like smooth water frozen in place, catching every step as if it remembered each movement. The ceiling stretched high above, where crystals reflected light to form patterns like stars in the night sky. To step inside was to feel both small and full of wonder. Milan stood near the entrance, quietly watching. He was young, dressed in the plain uniform of his delegation. He came from Earth, a world that had only recently joined the councils of the galaxy. To many here, humans were new, fragile, and unimportant. Most delegates did not even notice him. They passed by in robes of shining silk, in armor decorated with jewels, or in bodies of metal shaped with perfect design. Their voices filled the hall with greetings, laughter, and the sound of old friendships. Milan felt like a shadow among giants, but he did not let it trouble him. He had not come to impress with power or status. He had come to learn, to see with his own eyes the unity of the stars. His heart beat quickly, half with excitement, half with nerves. This was the first time he had seen so many different species together in one place. Winged diplomats hovered gracefully above the crowd, their feathers glowing like lanterns. Tall beings with silver skin stood in circles, speaking with slow and careful tones. Even machines shaped like living statues moved with dignity, their voices ringing like bells. The crystal ballroom was alive with color and sound, yet Milan's eyes kept moving until they found someone who did not seem to belong to the celebration. Near one of the tall crystal pillars stood a young woman. Her name was Aria, though Milan did not know it yet. She was unlike the others around her. While most smiled and spoke with loud voices, she stood in quiet stillness. Her gown was simple but elegant, woven with threads that shimmered like moonlight. Her skin held a faint glow, smooth like polished stone, and her eyes were deep with thought. She belonged to one of the noble houses of a powerful empire, yet in that moment, she seemed distant, as though the brightness of the hall had no place in her heart. Milan hesitated. He was only a junior aide, without rank or title. It was not his place to approach someone of her standing. But something about her silence drew him. She looked as if she carried a weight no one else could see, and he thought perhaps a single word might ease it. Gathering his courage, he stepped closer. "Good evening," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Aria turned her head. Her eyes rested on him with calm surprise. For a moment he thought she would ignore him, like so many others had. Instead, she gave a small nod. "Good evening," she replied, her tone soft and measured. Milan smiled faintly. "This place is beautiful. Like walking inside a dream." Aria's gaze moved around the hall. "Yes. Beautiful," she agreed. Then her voice lowered slightly. "But sometimes beauty feels like glass, bright, yet cold." Milan paused, considering her words. "It does," he said at last. "Everyone looks close here, but still far apart. Like they are together only in appearance." Her eyes focused on him more sharply now. Most who came to her spoke in polished phrases or heavy formality. His words were plain, yet they carried honesty. "You see clearly for one so young," she said. He gave a quiet laugh. "Maybe it is because I stand on the edge. From there, the picture looks different." For the first time, she smiled. It was a small smile, but it softened her face more than the light of the crystals could. "Perhaps the edge gives the truest view," she answered. They spoke for a while longer, their voices steady against the rising noise of the hall. Milan told her of of oceans that shone like silver under the moon, of mountains that rose like watchtowers of stone, of the struggles of his people to be heard in this vast galaxy. Arya spoke of her duties as part of her delegation, of the endless rules and traditions that bound her steps. With each word, the distance between them seemed smaller. The music of alien instruments filled the ballroom. Delegates raised glasses in toast, and laughter rang against the crystal walls. Yet Milan and Arya stood apart, two figures in quiet conversation. Around them, the galaxy spun in noise and brightness, but between them there was only a calm light, like the first spark of a flame. When another noble approached Arya, she turned to Milan before leaving. "Perhaps we will speak again tonight," she said. "I hope so," he replied, his voice sincere. As she moved away, Milan stayed where he was, his eyes following her until the crowd hid her from view. He had entered the crystal ballroom as a shadow among strangers. But now, because of a single exchange, he no longer felt invisible. Something had begun small, uncertain, but alive. And as the crystals above shimmered like stars, Milan felt that this night would change more than he could yet imagine. The music in the crystal ballroom grew louder as the night deepened. Groups of delegates gathered near the glowing pillars, speaking in voices that carried pride and power. Every word seemed chosen to impress. To Milan, it felt like a stage, where everyone performed their roles. But his thoughts were not on the speeches or the laughter. His eyes searched for Arya, the woman who had spoken with him in honesty, without mask or show. He spotted her across the hall, surrounded by nobles from her empire. They wore long robes shining with silver patterns. Their voices were smooth, but their smiles looked sharp, like blades hidden under silk. Arya stood among them with grace, answering politely, but Milan could see her eyes were distant. She looked as though her heart was not in their words. When their attention turned to a toast, Arya quietly stepped back. Milan, gathering courage, walked toward her once more. She noticed him and gave the smallest nod, as if inviting him to stay by her side. "You came back," she said gently. "I thought maybe you needed someone who speaks without rehearsed lines," Milan replied, his lips curving in a light smile. That brought a faint laugh from her, soft as a bell. "You are right. Too many voices here sound like echoes of old speeches. Yours sounds different." They walked slowly between the crystal pillars. The walls glowed faintly, changing colors like flowing water. Around them, the delegates continued their games of power, but Milan and Arya seemed apart, as though they had stepped into their own world inside the hall. "Tell me," Arya said, her eyes curious now, "what is Earth truly like? I have only seen images. Oceans, forests, cities, it all feels distant, like a picture that cannot be touched." Milan's face lit up. "Earth is not perfect," he admitted, "but it is alive in ways I cannot describe. The sea smells of salt and freedom. The forests are filled with sounds, birds, winds, rivers running over stones. And the sky, sometimes it is so wide and blue you feel small but happy to belong beneath it." Arya listened with quiet wonder. His words were simple, but they painted more life than any report or image could. For the first time that evening, her posture eased, her noble mask falling away. "It sounds warm," she whispered. "Our halls are grand, but they are heavy with rules. What you describe feels free." "And what about your world?" Milan asked. She glanced away, thoughtful. "It is beautiful too, in its own way. Towers rise like mountains of light. Rivers flow with crystal water. But everything is measured. Every step, every word, is weighed. We are taught to be perfect mirrors for our houses. There is little room for mistakes, or for choice. Milan nodded slowly. That sounds heavy to carry. Her eyes softened at his understanding. It is. For a moment, they walked in silence, their steps echoing lightly on the shining floor. Around them, the great hall sparkled, yet their quiet exchange seemed more real than the glittering displays. Then a sharp voice cut through the air. One of Arya's kinsmen, tall and stern, approached them. His eyes narrowed at Milan. You waste your time with a human, he said, not hiding his disdain. Better you return to your duties, Arya. You should not lower yourself. Arya's gaze grew cool. He speaks to me with respect, which is more than I can say for some who share my blood, she answered calmly. The man stiffened, taken aback, but Arya turned away before he could reply. She looked at Milan, her expression steady. Come. Let us walk further. Milan followed, though his heart pounded. He had not expected her to defend him. It made him realize something. Arya was not just kind, she was strong. Strong enough to stand against the pressure of her own people. As they reached a quieter corner of the hall, near a balcony where the crystals opened to show the stars outside, Arya spoke again. Do you see now? This is why your words matter to me. You speak freely. You do not wrap every sentence in chains. Milan met her eyes. Maybe because humans don't have the weight of empires yet. We only have hope. And sometimes hope is easier to carry than power. Her lips curved into another smile, warmer than before. Hope, she repeated softly. Yes, that is rare here. The sound of music drifted to them, distant now, while the stars beyond the crystal roof glimmered like 1,000 silent witnesses. For the first time in a long while, Arya felt less alone. Milan, too, felt something awaken in him. He had come here thinking he was nothing more than an observer, a shadow among greater beings. But speaking with Arya made him feel seen, as if his voice had weight. Neither spoke of it directly, but both felt it, that spark, quiet yet alive, glowing brighter than the crystals above. And in the endless brilliance of the ballroom, among strangers and whispers of politics, a small but powerful bond began to form. The crystal ballroom shone brighter as the celebration continued. The music rose with new energy, and dancers of many species moved across the glowing floor. Delegates raised crystal cups filled with sparkling drinks, speaking loudly of peace and friendship. To most, the night looked perfect, an image of unity and joy. But Milan, standing near the edge of the hall, felt something beneath the surface. There was a tension in the air, a whisper too soft for others to hear. He watched as Arya moved among her people, speaking politely but always with a distance in her eyes. He admired her calm strength, but he also noticed how others looked at her, some with pride, others with hidden sharpness. Milan's gaze shifted beyond her to the rest of the hall. The brightness was almost blinding, but in the corners, shadows stretched longer than they should. Something was not right. Milan stepped away from the crowd and wandered along the edge of the ballroom, where crystal walls met towering pillars. His ears caught fragments of conversations, talk of trade, politics, alliances, but one voice made him stop. Two figures stood behind a half-curved wall, partly hidden from sight. They were not speaking in the open tone of celebration, their words were low, urgent. The timing is set, one whispered. When the signal comes, the flames will spread. They will blame each other, and the talks will fall to ash. Milan's chest tightened. Flames. He leaned closer, careful not to make a sound. "And the humans?" the other asked. "They are nothing. They will be smoke before they can act." The words struck him like a blow. He pressed back against the pillar, his mind racing. Sabotage. Someone planned to burn the ballroom, to destroy everything this night was meant to build. He knew he should act quickly, but who would believe him? He was just a young human, ignored even when he spoke of simple matters. Still, he could not stay silent. Milan hurried back into the crowd, searching for someone in command. He found a group of guards dressed in shining armor. "Please," he said breathlessly, "I heard something dangerous. There is a plan to attack. We must act." Before the guard cut him off with a dismissive look. "Step back, human. The hall is secure. Do not spread foolish fears." "I am not lying," Milan insisted. "They spoke of fire, of spreading flames." The guard frowned. "You mistake whispers. Go enjoy your evening." With that, he turned away. Frustration burned in Milan's chest. He wanted to shout, to demand they listen, but he knew it would do no good. To them, he was only a background figure. Still, he could not let the warning go unheard. There was one person who might trust him. He searched the hall until he saw Arya again. She was standing near the balcony, her gown glowing faintly under the crystal lights. When she saw the urgency in his face, she stepped toward him at once. "Milan? What is it?" she asked. He lowered his voice, speaking quickly. "I heard two figures. They spoke of fire, of destroying the hall. It is not safe. Something is going to happen." Arya's eyes widened slightly, but unlike the guards, she did not dismiss him. She studied him with sharp focus, as if weighing the truth in his words. "You are certain of this?" "Yes," he said firmly. "I heard them with my own ears." She drew a quiet breath. "Then we must be careful. If you are right, this night may turn from light to darkness." Together, they moved along the edge of the ballroom, eyes scanning the crowd. They saw nobles laughing, envoys raising glasses, and guards standing tall at their posts, but no one else seemed aware of danger. The perfect picture of peace was still shining, but to Milan and Arya, the cracks had begun to show. As they walked, Arya spoke softly. "You see what others refuse to see. Many in this hall are blind because they believe themselves untouchable. That is why your warning matters." Her trust gave Milan strength. Though fear pressed at him, he felt steadier with her beside him. He knew now that he was not completely alone. The music swelled again, and dancers spun across the glowing floor. The lights from the crystal ceiling sparkled like falling stars. But to Milan, the beauty felt fragile, like glass ready to shatter. He glanced at Arya. Her expression was calm, yet her eyes were sharp, watching every shadow. Together they moved as quiet observers among the brightness, carrying a secret no one else would hear. The night still glittered, but somewhere hidden, danger was waiting. And though the rest of the hall danced in joy, Milan and Arya knew that soon, the fire would come. The celebration in the crystal ballroom reached its height. Musicians from three worlds played together, their notes rising like waves of light. Delegates clapped in rhythm, dancers spun across the glowing floor, and toasts of peace echoed against the tall crystal walls. To anyone watching, it was a perfect image of unity. But Milan and Arya stood near the edge, their eyes sharp, their hearts uneasy. The words Milan had overheard would not leave his mind. He felt the danger pressing closer, though the hall still glittered with joy. Arya remained calm beside him, but he saw the tension in her posture. She believed him, and that gave him strength, though fear still burned in his chest. Then, it began. A sudden tremor shook the ground beneath their feet. At first, it felt like part of the music, a deep note vibrating through the crystal floor. But then came a sharp crack, followed by a burst of red light from one of the pillars. The hall gasped as flames shot upward, racing across the shining walls. The crystal, once glowing softly, reflected the fire until the entire ballroom seemed to bleed with color. Screams rose as the music broke into chaos. Delegates scattered, their elegant robes flashing in the firelight. Guards shouted, but the heat spread faster than their orders. Smoke curled through the air, black against the glowing ceiling. The perfect picture of peace shattered in an instant. Milan's first thought was survival, but his second was Arya. He turned to her. "We have to move, now." She nodded, her calm never breaking. Together they rushed into the crowd, pushing through the wave of panic. Beings of every kind stumbled and cried out, searching for exits that were suddenly blocked by fire. The great crystal doors groaned, the flames licking at their edges. A sharp crash split the air. A piece of the ceiling, cracked by the heat, fell with a blinding flash. The crowd screamed louder. In the chaos, Milan saw Arya trapped as a heavy shard of crystal blocked her path. Smoke swirled, choking the air, and the firelight painted her face with desperate brightness. Without thinking, Milan forced his way toward her. The heat burned his skin, and sparks stung his arms, but he did not slow. He pulled at the fallen crystal with all his strength, his muscles shaking. It shifted only slightly, not enough. Arya coughed in the smoke, her voice breaking. "Leave me, save yourself." "Never!" Milan shouted. Summoning the last of his strength, he pushed harder. The shard tilted, enough for Arya to slip free. She stumbled forward, and he caught her in his arms. Her gown was singed, her face streaked with ash, but her eyes still shone. "You risked everything," she whispered, her breath uneven. "You're not alone in this," he said firmly. Together they pressed on, guiding others as they moved. A group of small, winged delegates cried out near the fire, unable to see through the smoke. Milan lifted one onto his shoulder and waved for the others to follow. Arya took the hand of a frightened child from another species and pulled them close, her calm voice cutting through the fear. Slowly, step by step, they pushed toward a narrow side passage where the flames had not yet reached. The ballroom was no longer a hall of light. It was a storm of fire and falling shards, each crash louder than the last. Yet Milan and Arya did not turn back. They moved together, their breaths ragged, their eyes fixed forward. At last they reached a safer space near one of the service doors. A group of survivors huddled there, trembling. The guards were scattered, some lost in the flames, others trying to fight a fire far greater than their strength. Milan guided the survivors into the passage, then turned back to help another pair struggling in the smoke. Arya stayed by his side, her steady hands lifting, pulling, guiding. When the last of the group reached the passage, Milan finally leaned against the wall, his chest heaving. His uniform was torn, his arms blackened with soot, but his eyes were still clear. Arya placed a hand on his shoulder, her own breathing heavy. "You saved me," she said softly, her voice almost lost in the crackle of flames. "You saved many. Without you, more would have been lost." Milan shook his head. "I only did what anyone should do." "No," Arya replied firmly, her gaze holding his. "You did what few would have dared. For a moment, even as the ballroom burned, the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. Around them was fire and ruin, but between them there was trust, strong and alive. Another crash reminded them the danger was not over. The flames still raged, and the ballroom was collapsing piece by piece. But they were not alone anymore. Together, they would face whatever came next. And as they pressed forward into the smoke, leading others through the storm, Milan realized something: the night that had begun with crystal light had now become a trial of fire. And in that fire, something unbreakable was being forged. The crystal ballroom was no longer a hall of peace. Fire roared across the walls, turning the shining crystals into glowing cages. Smoke twisted through the air, thick and choking. Every step felt like moving through a storm of heat and falling light. Yet amid the chaos, Milan and Arya kept moving forward, guiding those who could not find their way. Milan's arm still ached from pulling the heavy crystal shard, but he ignored the pain. His focus was on the frightened delegates around him. Some stumbled, their robes torn and burned, while others clutched one another, too shocked to move. He shouted through the smoke, his voice rough but strong. "Stay close. This way, keep moving." Arya stayed by his side, her calm presence holding the group together. She bent down to help a young boy whose hands shook with fear. "You are safe," she told him gently, lifting him to his feet. Her gown was torn and darkened with ash, but she walked with steady grace, as if the fire itself could not shake her. Together, they pressed forward. The flames crackled, and the crystals above groaned under the weight of heat. Pieces of the ceiling broke loose, crashing down with blinding sparks. Each time, Milan pulled someone aside, shielding them with his own body if needed. Arya, too, moved with courage, guiding the weak and the lost. At one point, they came to a blocked corridor. Flames had wrapped around the walls, leaving no path but through. The group hesitated, their eyes wide with terror. Milan stepped forward, testing the air. The heat stung, but he saw a narrow gap where the fire had not yet touched. "We can pass," he said firmly. "It's dangerous, but if we move quickly, we will make it." The others looked at him with doubt, but Arya placed her hand on his arm. "If you believe we can, then we will follow," she said, her voice steady. That gave the group courage. One by one, they followed Milan as he led them through the narrow space, his arm shielding his face from the heat. Arya guided the last ones, her calm voice urging them forward. When they reached the other side, the group gasped for air, coughing but alive. Relief swept through them like cool water, and many turned grateful eyes to Milan and Arya. But the danger was not over. The ballroom trembled again, and another section of the ceiling cracked open. A wave of fire spilled down, cutting off the path behind them. Milan coughed hard, his throat burning, yet he forced himself to keep going. Arya touched his arm, her eyes full of concern. "You're hurt," she said softly. "I'll be fine," he answered, though his skin was scraped and his breath ragged. "We just have to get them out." She looked at him for a moment, her gaze steady, then nodded. "Together," she said simply. That single word gave him strength. Together they were not just two strangers anymore. They were partners in survival, carrying others through the storm. At last, they reached a service corridor, where the smoke thinned and the air was cooler. The group hurried into the narrow passage, many collapsing in exhaustion. Milan leaned against the wall, his chest rising and falling heavily. Arya stood beside him, her hand lightly on his shoulder. "You carried us through fire," she said quietly, her voice filled with both admiration and warmth. He shook his head. Not alone. You gave them courage when I could not. They followed you as much as me. Her eyes softened. Perhaps. But I have lived my life in halls of crystal and words of power. Tonight, I saw true strength. It is not in titles or empires. It is in the courage to step into the flames for others. Milan met her gaze, and for a moment, the chaos around them seemed far away. Her words lit something inside him, brighter than the fire itself. He realized then that his actions had changed more than the fate of the night. They had changed the way she saw him, the way she saw humanity. The survivors around them slowly found their strength, whispering thanks, their eyes full of gratitude. Milan helped one of the wounded to sit, while Arya wrapped her shawl around a trembling child. In the dim corridor, their presence felt like a shield against the storm still raging behind them. Yet even in this moment of rest, they both knew the danger was not finished. The fire still roared in the great hall, and the building shook with each crack of falling crystal. The ballroom was dying, and they would have to find a way out before it collapsed entirely. But for now, amid the fear and the flames, Milan and Arya stood side by side, their bond forged in the heart of danger. It was more than chance that had brought them together. It was something stronger, something that would not be broken by fire. The fire in the crystal ballroom had finally weakened. Smoke still curled through broken windows, and the once bright chandeliers now lay shattered across the floor. Crystals that had once sparkled like stars were blackened, their beauty scarred. The grand hall of peace had become a ruin of ash and silence. Milan stood near the doorway of the service corridor, his body aching but his spirit unbroken. His clothes were torn, and soot darkened his face, yet his eyes stayed alert. Around him, survivors sat against the walls, coughing softly, some whispering prayers of thanks. Arya moved among them, her hands gentle as she offered comfort. She tore her shawl into strips to bind wounds and spoke quietly to those who trembled with fear. Her gown, once radiant, was now grey with ash, but she carried herself with the same calm strength as before. For a while, no one spoke loudly. Only the faint crackle of dying flames and the distant creak of falling crystal broke the silence. But as the survivors began to breathe easier, murmurs of unease filled the corridor. Questions arose, questions heavier than the smoke. Why did the fire start? One elder asked, his voice shaking. Was it an accident? Another delegate shook her head. No, I saw shadows moving before the flames spread. This was no accident. Milan frowned, his jaw tight. He had felt the same. The fire had spread too fast, too sharp, as if guided by unseen hands. He remembered the sound of crystal shattering before the blaze, almost like a signal. Arya met his eyes across the corridor. Her expression was calm, but her gaze told him she understood. Something darker was hidden behind this tragedy. Later, when the wounded rested, Milan and Arya stepped into a smaller chamber connected to the corridor. The air here was cooler, though smoke still clung faintly. It was sabotage, Milan said, his voice firm. The fire was planned. Arya nodded slowly. I felt it too. The crystals are not so easy to ignite. Someone knew how to strike at their heart. Her tone was heavy with thought, and for a moment, she seemed far older than her graceful face suggested. She turned toward the broken wall, her eyes catching what little moonlight pierced the smoke. Who would do this? She whispered. The ballroom was meant to be a place of unity. No empire, no council, no world would gain by destroying it unless they feared unity, Milan finished. His fists clenched. Someone wanted to divide us. To make us blame each other. Arya looked at him then, her eyes shining with both sorrow and respect. You see clearly, Milan. That is rare, even among rulers. He shook his head. I am no ruler. I'm just a man who refuses to let people burn. But Arya smiled faintly, though her eyes carried sadness. Perhaps that is what true rulers should be. Their words lingered in the quiet chamber, filling the space with a strange mix of heaviness and hope. Outside, the survivors began to gather strength, speaking softly of rebuilding, of returning home. Yet a shadow now lay over them all, a shadow of doubt. Milan and Arya returned to the group. A messenger from the city guard arrived, his armor scorched, his voice tired. The fire is under control, he reported. We are clearing paths through the rubble. You must leave soon, the ballroom is no longer safe. The delegates nodded, but their faces were pale. The ruin of the hall was not only a wound of stone and crystal, it was a wound of trust. Whispers of blame already stirred between them. Some accused one empire, others pointed to another. The unity that had filled the ballroom hours ago was cracking, just like the ceiling above them. Milan saw this and felt anger rise. Not now, he said sharply. We lived because we stood together. If you turn against each other now, then the fire has already won. His words struck the group into silence. Arya stepped forward, her voice calm but strong. Milan speaks truth. We must not let fear guide us. If we divide, the shadow that caused this will grow stronger. Her voice carried authority, but it also carried warmth. Many who listened felt their hearts steady. Some lowered their heads in shame, realizing the danger of suspicion. When the group finally began moving toward the city, Milan and Arya walked side by side. The streets outside were filled with ash drifting like snow. The night sky was pale with smoke, and the stars above looked dim. As they walked, Arya spoke softly. This fire was not the end. It was only the beginning. Whoever caused it will strike again. Milan nodded. Then we will be ready. And next time, we will not only survive, we will uncover the truth. For a moment, silence hung between them, broken only by the crunch of ash under their steps. Then Arya looked at him with quiet certainty. I believe fate brought you here, Milan. Not just to save lives, but to change what comes after. Her words stayed with him long after they left the ruins behind. The fire had destroyed the ballroom, but it had also lit something new between them, a bond of trust, courage, and hope. The crystal ballroom had been rebuilt, not to its former grand perfection, but with careful hands and quiet hope. The walls no longer shone like the night sky, yet they held a warmth that felt stronger than before. The fire had left scars, but those scars reminded everyone that life could survive even the fiercest trials. Delegates gathered once more, though this time their faces carried a new respect for each other, and for the courage that had saved many lives. Milan and Arya arrived together, their steps steady, their eyes alert but calm. The world seemed quieter now, the air lighter after weeks of tension and rebuilding. Arya wore a gown of soft blue, simple but elegant. It shimmered under the crystal lights, reflecting the strength in her calm smile. Milan's uniform was neat, though he still bore faint marks of ash from that night. They walked side by side, not as strangers, not as mere allies, but as two hearts joined by experience, trust, and the unspoken bond that had grown between them in the fire. As the ceremony began, the new ballroom glimmered with gentle light. The survivors of the fire and their families found places among the guests. Leaders who had ignored Milan's warnings now watched him closely, their expressions a mix of respect and humility. Arya leaned slightly toward him. "The fire changed many things," she said softly. Milan nodded. "Yes. But it also reminded us what really matters. Courage. Trust. And those willing to act when others hesitate." Her gaze met his, steady and clear. "And perhaps some bonds are stronger than even fire." He smiled, a quiet warmth spreading through him. "Stronger than anything I've known." Music began again, softer this time, gentle notes weaving through the hall like a ribbon of hope. Arya turned to him, her hand extended. "May I have this dance?" she asked. Milan's heart skipped. This simple gesture carried weight beyond words. He took her hand, careful, and led her to the center of the hall. The light fell around them in soft waves, highlighting the subtle scars of the walls, the faint shimmer of crystal, and the hope that lingered in the hearts of everyone present. They moved together in rhythm with the music, not in showy steps but in a harmony that felt natural. Around them, delegates paused to watch, sensing something rare, a quiet strength born not of titles or power, but of shared courage and trust. For Milan, the moment felt unreal yet perfect. The woman who had seemed distant and unreachable now walked beside him as an equal. Every glance, every small movement spoke of the nights they had faced together, the smoke, the fire, the fear, and how they had come through it stronger. Arya's hand rested lightly on his shoulder. "Do you remember the first night?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Milan nodded, smiling. "How could I forget? You were calm even when the flames were everywhere. I thought you were stronger than anyone." She laughed softly, a sound brighter than the music. "And you ran into the fire without a second thought. I knew then that humans were not what others thought. Not weak. Not small. Brave, even in the face of danger." Milan felt warmth rise in his chest, a feeling deeper than admiration. "I could not have done it without you," he said sincerely. "I would not have wanted to face it with anyone else." Their steps slowed, the music carrying them gently. Around them, the ballroom was quiet, save for soft murmurs of approval and the glow of the crystals. The world outside had not yet changed, but in this moment, Milan and Arya created a small universe of their own. "Perhaps this is the true victory," Arya said, her voice soft. "Not the rebuilding of walls, but the trust we carry forward." Milan looked into her eyes, feeling the weight and warmth of her words. "Yes. And trust is stronger than any fire." They continued to move, step by step, hand in hand. The music swelled briefly, carrying them toward the center of the hall, where the light reflected off the crystals above. Though the ballroom bore the marks of its trial, it also shone with something new: resilience, hope, and the strength of those who had refused to give in. When the dance ended, Arya leaned slightly on Milan's arm, her eyes filled with a quiet joy. "Thank you," she said, her words simple but full of meaning. He smiled, brushing a lock of ash from his forehead. "No. Thank you. For trusting me, for standing with me. For being you." Outside, the stars gleamed faintly through the crystal roof, quiet witnesses to a bond that had grown in fire and now flourished in light. For the first time in the ballroom, the survivors felt that the night could belong to them again, not as a place of fear, but as a place of courage, unity, and love. And in the center of it all, two hearts moved together, unbroken, stronger than ever, ready to face whatever the future might bring. The crystal ballroom was no longer perfect, but it was alive. And so were they, Milan and Arya together, their bond forged in fire, shining in a new light.